And please give a warm welcome to Robert Clyde.
Well, it's a great honor to be invited to talk to you on this occasion, the 100th anniversary of the school. And I must say that talking to you is much more frightening than talking to a crowd anywhere else. Because I know I can't get away with as much. At my age, I should be wise, but there's some doubt about that. So I'll just talk and you'll have to put up with a poem or two. Can you hear me all right? Even at the sides and in the back? It's hard to imagine what Madison was like in the earliest days. I think I remember talking with Bud Seaman, and he said that he and another man got off the train at Madison on the same day, probably early in the century. And the man said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to go into the shoe repair business. Everybody needs shoes." And he said to the other man, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm planning to open a movie theater." It was Mr. Hewlett. And then he said, "Well, I found out something. I found out that people go to movies with holes in their shoes." Well, that was a good line. My mother was born here in 1902, and she died just a few weeks ago on June 24th. And it's amazing to think that she lived through almost all the history of this town. And in fact, through a third of the life of the nation. It's incredible. The nation's only about 300 years old. And she was 95 when she died. Her father came here from Trondheim. So there's a lot of Norwegian spoken here in the early days. Everyone here sounded like people on Garrison Keeler. And there's a few brave Irishmen, the McGuires mainly, and some Germans, and that caused a lot of trouble. But, you know, mostly Norwegian. You know those Ole and Per jokes? Ole says, someone says, "Ole, what would you do, if someone gave you $1 million? And Ole said, "Well, I suppose I'd just keep farming, until it was gone." This is more true now than then. And people read the Decoraposten, which was one in Norwegian that came out of Decorah, Iowa, which regularly showed Norwegians trying to catch up on the new technology in the United States. For example, one comic strip shows two farmers setting up an electric fence to keep in a huge field of hogs. And then they attach it to a 110-volt line. And by dusk, there are dead pigs lying around everywhere. That's the problem with new technology. But there are lots of new experiences in this area on the farm. In Norway, the oldest son got the farm, period. So the younger sons had to hire themselves out for the rest of their lives. So here even a younger son could get a farm. I know that in 1855, from No, which was a little port that lay near Blaya in Hardanger, out of the 80 people in that area, 34 of them left for the United States in a single day. So in Utney's came and Siljans and Henningsgaards and Petersons and Famrights and Haugies and Nesvolds and, the whole crew. And some of them came to Lee, Illinois first, then in 1888 came in covered wagons up to Madison. And there were Indians here, of course, when we got here. And you know that Lac qui Parle had one of the first places on the prairie that was friendly to Indians, teaching them the Bible and so on. And I remember as a boy hearing this story, there was someone in Madison who had been kind to one of the Indians over at Lac qui Parle one winter, maybe in a snowstorm, saved his life. And so even while I was a boy, that Indian would walk over from Lac Parle once a year, the 20 miles across the prairie, walk into this man's house. It was down somewhere by where Arnie Rowan is now. Sit down in the living room, not say a word, sit there all day, wouldn't accept any food, and then get up and walk back to Lac Parle. It was very Native American. They don't dig conversation too much. And the main thing, what is the gift he had to give, was his presence. Indicate his thankfulness. I thought it was a beautiful story. Walking 20 miles, sit down in your living room, sit there quietly, not asking for anything. 6 o'clock, get up and walk home. Do that every year for 25 years. And Little Crow, of course, didn't have such good luck. Little Crow, when he came across the border to pick blueberries, was shot by a farmer by Fargo. But for the immigrants, everything went well. Every year more churches were set up. Traveling Norwegian painters and carpenters would create the altars, such as the ones at the Old Faith Lutheran and at the Ness Lutheran. And it was a big thing at that time, whether you were a town Olson or a country Olson. Were you a town Bly or a country Bly? We belonged to the country Blys. The town Blys would have big ferns in their living rooms, and these huge claw-footed furnitures, and very tiny china cups. The Madison Museum, which I must say is one of the finest of these local historical museums that I've ever seen, has a very fine exhibition. There's the director of that museum. Is she here? Where is she? She'll probably be making some exhibits. That is a marvelous museum. It has wonderful objects from that time. So we have the right to be part of that museum. Well, things were going so well that we decided to steal the courthouse. You know, you can imagine, well, why did you do that, Ole? Man, it seemed like no one was using it, you know. And I love those old and fair jokes. My wife found another one the other day, because the Norwegians at that time were very proper, but not always about the right thing. And so one day, Ole was very sick. Ole was dying, you know, and his wife was making a cake. And he said, you know, Olga, could I have a little of that cake? She says, no, Ole, that's for your funeral. And we all know many others that can't be repeated inside a schoolroom. So after that time of the immigrants, in which it was as if everything went better every year, then eventually the Depression came, and that upward movement stopped for a while. Of course, the dust in the dirt storms were not as bad as in Kansas or Oklahoma, but there was dust enough. Just last week, I found a collection of reminiscences that 70 or 80 different people had written, called the Dirty 30s. And people write about the hard life in the 30s, the completely unheated bedrooms you'd sleep in at night, the grasshoppers, the lack of pain, the lack of rain, hot like this all the time. This was heaven. Fence lines that turned with the help of tumbleweeds into snowbanks made out of dirt that the cows simply walked over. The lack of money, the constant hard work, the poor shoes. Everyone was so poor they didn't know anyone wasn't poor. Postage dropped from 3 cents to 2 cents for about a year. The only thing you bought was kerosene for the lamps. One of the most brilliant of these little pieces was written by Phyllis Hills Brantle. Any of you know her? Phyllis Hills Brantle from Madison, Minnesota. And here's what she said. Our shoes needed to be shined for school the next day. There wasn't any money for such luxuries as shoe polish for my one and only pair of shoes. So egg white would keep them presentable for a day if I walked on the harder tracks of the dusty road. At a supper of potatoes, bologna, remember bologna? Potatoes, bologna, and fresh bread, no one did much talking. This was a special treat that Mother had prepared for us, hoping to cheer us up. Cream and sugar poured over a freshly cut bread was a delicacy. We were lucky. Many went to bed hungry. The hobos that came to our door a few blocks from the tracks thought that Mother gave them a banquet. Well, after reading some of those stories last week, one sense occurred to me. You know, privation is the only fun there is. Everyone was so happy during that time. So you can say privation is fun that sticks to you. Or privation and family are the only funs there are. You can do various things with that. In a time of privation, children remember sugar on bread, mittens on one hand and the other hand cold, everyone laughing when someone made a joke. How amazed you are that God lets you live through the year. How sweet friends are when they're all as poor as you. You know, all the crazy things that happens when you're not watching television. I was born in 1926, and so I was too young to remember the worst days of the Depression. But the mood of those anxious days lived on till 1940 or so. Someone gave me a photograph of my family in 1940, and I wrote a poem about that. And here's a scene I'll read to you. It's called A Family Photograph, Sunday morning, 1940. They've gathered on the farm lawn, 10 people, all ages. Esther Berg's hair has waves like Clara Bow's. The women look as if they have too much to do. One boy smiles, it's me, and looks down. He seems glad, but his sweater sleeve is too short. The men's hands, none placed in their pockets, all hang down. They look as if they wanted to grasp something. The men smile, but their eyes say hard things. The world pulls at me. It tore my father away already. That 40-acre farm he bought by Marietta is still black. I have to go now. It was 1940, grasshoppers, hard times. Two old women who guard the group on both sides take nothing on trust. They say, I trust my hands, and that's all. So I'll read you the poem again. The two old women were, on one side was Henry Royce's mother, old Mrs. Royce, who spoke nothing but Norwegian. She and Henry lived for years in the basements underneath the Normal School, which is now a part of the Old People's Home. Carrie Bly at the other end. And in between them were Bert Berg, Mabel Berg, and their son, Jim Bly, and myself, Jacob Bly, and Alice. And the women, the old maids, the old women, the old mothers, looked as if they didn't trust men, you know? I trust my hands, and that's all. Probably fairly smart, really. But it's amazing how much shows in these old photographs. It's astounding. And the whole suffering of all that Depression time is right there looking at you. They've gathered on the farm lawn 10 people, all ages. Esther Berg's hair has waves like Clara Bowles. Women look as if they have too much to do. That's probably right. One boy smiles. That's me. And looks down. He seems glad, but his sweater sleeve is too short. The men's hands, none of them placed in the pockets. All of them hanging down. You can just see them. They look as if they wanted to grasp something. And the men smile, but their eyes say hard things. Their eyes say, the world pulls at me. It tore my father away already. That 40-acre farm he bought by Marietta is still black. I have to go now. You get that picture in the photographs? The men were saying, I have to go now. It was 1940, grasshoppers, hard times. Two old women who guard the group on both ends take nothing on trust. Their faces say, I trust my hands, and that's all. So, In the 1940s, there were still threshing and thresher crews. You know, 4 or 5 farmers would gather around the one farmer who owned a threshing machine, and the others would contribute one rack and one team and one bundle pitcher, or sometimes 2, and the crew would move from farm to farm. Everyone would get excited. Who would have the best pies? And there would be an hour rest under trees after lunch. I remember how wonderful it was to come in from working and they'd have all that cold water out there and you'd wash your hands, and then all these busy women were there making these pies. And it was something wonderful for women too. There was a certain majesty in making that much food. And food that you know was going to taste good. So, and there was a genuine feeling of community in those threshing crews and a lot of jokes. For example, sometimes one of the ministers in town would hire himself out as a bundle pitcher because we weren't paying him much, you know. So a typical thing that would happen would be the bundle pitcher, he'd be up on top of the load beginning to go down, and all the bundle pitchers would work very hard so that they could have their bundles hit the mouth of the threshing machine, you know, not bunched up and not too much difference, but 3 or 4 inches in between, they should fall exactly like that, and everyone watched to see how good they were. So someone would come up while he was on top and tie one of the bundles on the minister's load to the wagon itself. So he'd get work down, I was watching this, and he's trying to do this, and suddenly he hits that bundle, and it doesn't come, so he switches quickly over here, keeps his rhythm going, and then you can see him work back, and try it once more. Didn't move, but he saved a couple nearby, you know, so he grabbed those and puts them on, and then he does it a 3rd time. There aren't many left now. There's only about 30 bundles left in the front of the thing, and then you can see he's got to do it sooner or later. He jams the pitchfork in and falls, and of course it's tied, and he loses his rhythm, and everyone, everyone laughs, and he's humiliated, and then he decides, I got to get out of here. So he throws the last bundle in, and wants to get out of this humiliating place, and he hits but someone has untied the horses, so that the horses gallop away and pull the reins out of his hands. And there he is standing there. So that's how you get back at people who scold you on Sunday. And usually ministers only did that 1 or 2 years, and then they got the message. But I remember my father, we were rather fond of, you know, Dr. Mr. Tetley was a wonderful minister, and we were very lucky to have Tetley. And his children are still wandering around the country somewhere. And my father would always bring in a couple pheasants and a couple geese and give to the minister every year, no matter what we thought of the sermons, because it wasn't personal. And make us kids go and bring the pheasants up, which is a wonderful thing. I liked it. So I wrote a poem about this threshing time. And I have to say, I think it was a lot of hard work for the women. The girls, I think, enjoyed seeing the boys working. It was heaven for boys. It was heaven for boys. To be together with older men that way, to do some work, and if you did it well, some older man would smile at you and say you've done well. And then all the fun and all of that. It was heaven. So I wrote a little poem called When Threshing Time Ends. I felt very bad every year when the threshing time was over. And I feel really bad now that the combines have come in and there aren't threshing times anymore. But when threshing time ends, well, there's a time things end. The fields are clean, belts are put away, and the horses go home. What is left endures in the minds of boys who wanted this joy never to end. The splashing of hands, jokes, and oaths. It was a music touching and fervent. The Bible was right. Presences come and go. Wash in cold water. The fire has moved. I'll read it for you once more. In poems, you always read it twice. I learned it from Robert Frost. he'd read a poem and he says, all right, I'll read it again. Now listen this time, will you? That's what he used to say. So it was a sort of a comfort to me at the end to say, well, it's over. One way to say is that time is over, and when the threshing team moves away, it's gone, and that time of our life is gone. But you can also say, well, there was a fire, and it moved. Maybe the fire's somewhere else now. Is that clear? It's better, it's smarter than saying, God, I just hate that, when it all ends. There is a time, Jim Bly and I had such fun in the threshing times, and Tom's here, and I wanted to tell you, your brother and I had great times. There's a time things end, the fields are clean, belts are put away, and the horse is gone. What is left endures in the minds of boys who wanted this joy never to end. The splashing of hands, jokes, and oaths. It was a music, touching and fervent. The Bible is right. Presences come and go. Wash in cold water. The fire has moved. If it isn't too hot in here, I'll do another little poem at this point. Is it okay? My mother, in order to help the money coming in, worked at the county treasurer's office for A.K. Farrell for about 23 years off and on. And there was a hired girl named Marie Schmidt, later Marie Nelson from Millbank, who really took care of Jim and I a lot. And in the book of poems I published a few months ago, this little book, I published a poem about her. For a childhood friend, Marie Nelson. It's just a farm poem. If I read it in New York, they're like, what the hell's going on? So I got to read it to you. So, for a childhood friend, Marie, she knew a lot about life on the farm. Wagon poles that sometimes broke, and grown men pinned against the fence posts by a bolt. Sometimes you tie a favorite lamb to a tree so the old bucks will not kill him, and he hangs himself on the road. Movie Saturday night. Girls laugh behind their sleeves at men or boys. Marie, 30 years old, still loved the high school. You know how that is? Marie, 30 years old, still loved the high school, the tall boys, gossip about the teachers, the proms. She also loved our lives that were not going so well. She married the hired man. My grandmother told her not to, and he drank. So it ends with this phrase, and he drank. And in a way, it was a more serious phrase than it is now, because you got to understand, at that time, we knew nothing about AA. Nothing was done for anyone. Sometimes alcohol is used as a medicine for depression, and it works for a while, and it doesn't work anymore. But that was a great characteristic of that time, that nobody knew anything about what it meant if someone was drinking. So I'll read you the last. My grandmother was living in the house that was carried, and Art Nelson was the hired man, and Marie said, I think I'm going to marry Art. And my grandmother took her aside, as an older woman should, and said, listen, don't do it. But you know young women, do they listen? They never have, and they never will. And that's one thing that makes the world keep going round. Marie, 30 years old, still loved the high school and the tall boys and the gossip about the teachers and the proms. She also loved our lives that were not going so well. She married the hired man. My grandmother told her not to, and he drank. So the high peak of farm life around here, I think, as we all know, was probably that time of threshing when so many things were done together. Families worked together, so much work inside the families. People said, you know, when you had a bunch of kids and you were all farming and you had gardens and all the work was good. Because all the work helped the whole family and the whole town. And now, you know, there are hundreds and hundreds of human beings who are doing work that is not good, and which they don't like to do even. We're talking about offices and IBM. So the best time in a way was that time when old people and young people lived so much together. There was a time following the Second World War, shortly after, before the machinery companies began to push huge tractors. I wondered if the county agent was complicit in this thing of pushing huge tractors on farmers. I don't know. County agent being paid by the machine companies. I don't know, but it made a huge change when you started getting these $20,000 tractors. That was in the old days. I asked Tom, you know, the tractor costs $20,000? Yeah, that'll buy a wheel. So many forces brought that life to an end. And we know the losses that take place when size makes it difficult for family farms to survive. And I like the word family farm, and I just want to emphasize the word family. We have another life now. I want to quote a few words from a woman that I admire a great deal, a woman named Mary Pfeiffer, who lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. And a few years ago, she did a book called Reviving Ophelia. Do you remember Ophelia, who drowned in Hamlet? And Mary Pfeiffer is a therapist in Lincoln, Nebraska, and she said, two groups of people are in a lot of trouble in the country. The first are the small boys about 6 to 7 years old who are drowning in female energy because there's too many female teachers compared to the number of male teachers. And oftentimes, 50% of houses have no adult male in them at all in the United States. So that little group is in trouble here because not that the women are doing anything wrong, it's that there's just too much feminine energy in their lives compared with the males. And the second ones are the adolescent girls. She said they're not doing well. One of the things she said was that adolescent girls in the old days had to struggle between their values and the values of their parents. Oh, Dad, how can you be so square? Or mother, you surely don't believe what you're saying, they say to their mothers. And that was enough to occupy the mind through high school. But now, the daughters ignore all that. What they really try to do is to adjust to the values of junk culture. They don't fight with the parents anymore. They're trying to adjust to the values of junk culture. And those values are sex early, alcohol early, drugs early. And she says the girls are not succeeding in this. The whole values of junk culture are sort of crazy. So she said there's a lot of girls, adolescent girls, drowning. And that's one of the things she says in her Reviving Ophelia. She has a new book out about the family. It's called Sheltering Each Other. And I'll read you a passage from that. For the first time in history, children are not being socialized by their parents. Our children are being raised by TVs and other appliances. Multinational corporations have become the culture storytellers, teaching children what life is all about. With the once taken for granted support of the extended family and the community is now evaporated, she says, you cannot survive as a family if you just let the culture happen. That's a tough paragraph, don't you think so? Let me read it to you once more. What I'm trying to say is that life has changed in a certain way, and only the children know how much it's changed, because they're the ones who are mainly getting ruined by it. We're a little above that, you know, we float, we got our stuff, and we turn on the television, we turn it off, but you know, in upper-class families, the television is on like 1 hour a day. In middle-class families, on 4 hours a day. The tragic thing is that in Minneapolis, for example, in the lower-class families, both black and white, the television is never turned off at all. So that they have this endless junk coming in. And I think that she's right to say, for the first time in history, children are not being socialized by the parents. TV has outflanked the parents. Children take much more of their values from TV than they ever do from you. That's completely different than 50 years ago, isn't it? Completely. Our children are being raised by TVs and other appliances. Multinational corporations have become the culture of storytellers, teaching children what life is all about. Where the once taken for granted support of extended family and community now evaporated, she warns, you cannot survive as a family if you just let the culture happen. We have an advertising industry that is telling kids in your own home, don't think, act on impulses. It's absolutely insane, she says. We have TVs in our birthing rooms. The first thing a baby can hear when he or she pops out of the womb is a TV commercial. Whoa. Oh. So, I'm just going to talk about that in a few minutes here. One way to look at this is that every family used to be a filter for information. And they would let only a certain amount of information in, depending on what the families believed. Fundamentalist families would have a heavy filter, not much come in, and so on. Republicans and Democrats had a different filter, but a lot of filtering was done by the family. But now with television, flood of information hits, there's no filtering left at all. So, limiting the amount of information your children receive was not entirely healthy, but it was more healthy than the situation now, in which the television set bypasses the parents, and children know more about corruption and sexuality at 10 years old than some man in Vienna knew when he was 60. So the adults lost the control, that's another way to say it. I did a book called The Sibling Society, or The Childish Society, about the way the parents have really lost control, and the whole country is being run by adolescents now. Just look at David Letterman, you see what I mean. And Seinfeld is wonderful, but they're all kids. Do you notice that? There's not a single adult on Seinfeld. No one has a serious interest in the future of the United States, what might be happening, no serious interest in art, no serious interest in serious music or literature. They're always trying to get rid of their parents, you know, trying to talk to parents from moving into Florida or something like that. Very sweet creeps. So, it's hard to know what to do about this. And I'm not going to try to tell you, because you have been sharing your concerns in this matter by working hard to keep the community of Madison alive. And by bringing in art organizations and singing work. And I really, Norman Larson and many others, and Donovan Trilla and others have been part of this. And I'm really, it makes me very happy to see Madison working in this lively way. And I just want to stand with you in this matter. What's the solution? Well, we have to recognize that the media corporations are now stronger than the church. And they're actually stronger than the Congress. So there's tremendous resistance, you know, in the media to having any rating system for sex and violence. NBC is refusing to go along with the rating right now. So that breaking the TV sets or reforming the media is not going to happen. That's very sad. But the corporations are now bigger than Congress. Every time Congress tries to do something, someone buys them off. So one thing you can do is to move the TV out of your living room and put it in some small, dirty little room with no chairs, smelling of dog poop. Kids will go there anyway, but I make them think a little bit. And then, so I do think the battle over the television is a crucial one. And but if our children are being raised by appliances, I think the second implication is that we have to do more work in raising other people's children. People in a town like Madison are relatively lucky in having some fathers and grandfathers and so on nearby. But I can't tell you how many children in the country have no father. What is it, 35% of white households, there's no adult male in the house. 65% of black households, that makes 1 in 2. That means 1 in 2 daughters have absolutely no adult male in the house. How will they ever learn to get along? I mean, we still haven't learned. Anyway, but you learn a lot by watching your mother and your father fight, you know? That's how not to do it. But anyway. But if you never see them fight, it's worse. So it's as if we all have to take some part more than we're doing in raising other people's children. And some are doing that by bringing in children who are not so lucky, so to speak, to a town, bring in 20 of them in the summertime, in Chicago, in Minneapolis, let them be here, put 1 in every house, don't let them live together, and so on. And you'll learn a lot that you didn't want to know. But, and then I think another implication is that grandparents are more important than they ever were before in the life of the country. And we've never had grandparents so poorly used. Sometimes many parents have 2 jobs. And we have to say to grandparents, we want you to plow up those stupid lawns in Phoenix and come back here and start taking care of the children. So, the children need company. The children need play. A lot of play and a lot of talk and a lot of conversation to overcome all this coldness of the technology. So I think I'm 70 years old now, and I must say that I think a job for men and women 10 years younger than myself and 10 years older than myself is to stop thinking about retirement and stop looking in that direction towards the end of life. Instead, I think the thing to do is to turn around like this and face the youth. And you know that it's like a 180-degree turn. And it's very difficult, as you know, for young men in our culture to have any kind of connection. There are no initiation systems anymore where they can become adult men. And the same is true for the girls. Very little of that. So many of the young kids watch their parents regress and become adolescents, and they say, well, in that case, I'm not going to become an adult either. Why should I? So there's entire pockets of adolescents and younger ones who don't know anything about working, am I right? About respect. It's hard to believe the lack of respect that's taking place in schools now toward teachers and so on. It's, you hear some of the stories, you cannot believe it. The other day I just heard one story in which a teacher said to the child, I want you to stop that right now. I'm sick of you interrupting the whole class. I want you to sit down and be quiet. He goes home, gets a hold of his father. They sue the school for mental abuse. And it cost the father $10,000 before this little incident was over. And of course, when the kid's 2 or 3 years later, he said, well, I was stupid, I'm sorry I did that. But and the father said, where's my $10,000? But so we're watching here, the schools are being outflanked, and the schools are not doing enough. The returning of reprimand is something that we have to bring back. That doesn't mean beating. It just means you're not doing it. Chicago has now, for the first time this year, decided to stop passing all the people automatically. They were passing from the 9th grade to 11th grade. Why? Well, we didn't want to hurt the child's self-esteem. Oh, great. You graduate from college or so stupid you can't even add up a group of numbers, and this is going to help your self-esteem? So, a lot of funny things are going on in this direction. So, I think there's a line between adolescents and adults. And each one of us who are older need to turn and face that and try to pull one adolescent over into adulthood. You can't pull over 20. Maybe you can pull over 1. That's my image. That's my image for what we ought to do. So stop thinking about this. What is this thing the old people have, IRA or RWP? Dismantle AARP. I'm sick of the whole thing. And put our attention towards the young ones who are really going through the suffering. And try to get a hold of one of those and try to be a substitute parent or a grandparent for that one. I can feel it happening in my own family. Our daughter Mary, who some of you know, has a 3-year-old boy now. He's the first grandson, but Bridget, some of you remember, is pregnant, having a baby the 5th of August. And so, and Mary is very clear that she wants us to be a part of that boy's life. And she just says, you know, we want you to come every married life, we want you to come every couple of months, we want you to be a part of this. That's very different from the 60s, in which the kids are all trying to get away from their parents and away from their grandparents. Now something else is happening, in which the younger parents know they need the grandparents. So, so last summer, Ruth and I were visiting the little boy, and he was 2 years old, and it's amazing what a developed brain the kid has at 2 years old. I couldn't believe it. We were walking, and there was a little thing. We were taking the boy so his mother would be free in the afternoon. And this was in Italy, and there was a little post on the way walking back to his house, which looked a little like a telephone, Italian telephone box. And so he ran over to the telephone box and started talking to his mother. Then he would come up to me, and I wrote some little lines about it. Oh, it breaks my heart how much a small child needs loving events over and over. He or she needs to feed you pebbles. Feed you soup from the pebbles in his hand. This is an onion. This is an apple. Each bit of soup lifted on So we got about 10 minutes left, and I want to say a few words to brag about Madison. It's amazing when I get readings in Portland or Seattle or Washington or something, the liveliest one in the audience always seems to be from Madison. I don't understand that. Must be something in the water. I remember we did have a great basketball team in 1944 or so with Dave Remington and Ray Valla and Bud Lilliard and Perkins and Parnell Sculberstead, and you know, that amazing team proved we were as good as anyone else in the state. Better. The other day I was in Washington giving a reading. There was one person in the audience who was laughing and carrying on in the question period. And pretty soon he stood up and showed his Madison sweatshirt. I says, who are you? He says, I'm David Husted. It was Alvin Husted's nephew, and he's now a finance planner in Washington. So, there's something wild about the water in this town. A couple of years ago, I gave a reading in Fresno, California, and I talked about how grateful I was becoming to my old teachers, my college teachers, my high school teachers, my grade school teachers. And I read a little poem about that, and afterwards a woman came up to me and said, I'm your 6th grade teacher. It was Marie Sculberstead. I said, that's impossible, you look exactly like you did when you were teaching me. So the poem I read her was this one called Gratitude to Old Teachers. I was trying to walk across the lake in Moose Lake, where I live, and when it's frozen. I tried it in the summer, but it doesn't really work. When we stride or stroll across the frozen lake, we place our feet where they have never been. We walk upon the unwalked, but we are uneasy. Who is down there but our old teachers? Water that once could take no human weight, we were students then, holds up our feet and goes on ahead of us for a mile. Beneath us, the teachers, and around us, the students. I'll give it to you once more. Listen this time, will you? When we stride or stroll across a frozen lake, we place our feet where they have never been. We walk upon the unwalked, but we are uneasy. Who is down there? What are old teachers? Asking, are you sure that you're doing this right? Water that once could take no human weight, we were students then, holds up our feet. That's a good thing about getting older. You feel as if the ground underneath you is more solid. Water that once could take no human weight, we were students then, holds up our feet and goes on ahead of us for a mile. Beneath us, the teachers, and around us, the students. So that's where, are you here, Marie? Where's Marie? Are you here, Marie? Where is she? There she is. So we were in that little school out there, and Jim and I were the only ones in it, partly because in order to, everyone wanted to close down those small schools and make them combined, and you couldn't do it if one taxpayer refused. And my father said no. So they had to keep the little school open just for Jim and me. So man, it was a private tutoring. And so then it was just Jim and myself and Marie and others, and we'd ride an old horse to school and stuff like that. And then if they had a kid they couldn't handle in Madison, they'd send them out to us. So that we got a kind of a bad picture of people in town. Some of them were very imaginative, and I must tell you this one story. There's one time the teacher, I don't know if it was Marie or Miss Keeman, rebuked one of the boys. And when we came back for recess, he wasn't there. So we sort of looked out toward the coal shed and the little barn where we put the horses and so on. He was in there, and he peed out toward the hole, through the hole toward us. Very imaginative in the morning. Be a good protester, political protester later. Anyway, so I'm sure I'm going to try to see Marie this afternoon and try to write down some of these stories that happened at that time. And if any of you have stories like the shoemaker and the movie person who started movies in the village, any of those stories, be sure to come and tell me, because I want to be a sort of repository for stories of this town. That what else have I got to do? That'll be a lot of fun. So that poem is from Marie, and then we all have a chance tomorrow to show some gratitude to the old teachers, because tomorrow afternoon at the museum there will be a reception to meet and honor the old teachers. So I just want to express my gratitude to this community, and particularly to those people who have somehow kept going in intensity that was always in Madison, and seems to have been carried by the people who left as well as the people who are here. So I think we can brag a little about the variety and the tough-mindedness of the people who founded and supported this community. What I want to do now is to end with a little song. In Africa, I teach sometime with a man from West Africa and his wife. And what they do in that little village, their village is sort of the opposite of ours in a way. They believe that the people who have done well in any town or village or whatever always remain around and help the people who are living. And sometimes they take the form of trees that are standing at the edge of the village, so they can see what's going on. You know? And so the children in the morning all sing a certain song the first thing in the morning, which is gratitude to the ancestors. And for us, the ancestors would be the old immigrants, our grandfathers and grandmothers, teachers, parents. So I'll sing this little song for you once, and then I want you to do it with me. It goes something like this. Buddha Samine, Buddha Samine, Buddha Samine yo, Buddha Samine yo. And Samine are the male ancestors, and Mamine are the female ancestors. I'll do it with Mamine. Buddha Mamine, Buddha Mamine, Buddha Mamine yo, Buddha Mamine yo. Sing it with me. Buddha Samine, Buddha Samine, Imagine that you can communicate to them through the palms of your hands and say thank you to them. Buddha Samine, Buddha Samine, Buddha Samine, Buddha Samine. I have to say thank you to my mother who died just 3 weeks ago. Let's think of our mothers or our grandmothers once more with your hands up. Buddha Mamine, Buddha Mamine, Buddha Mamine, Buddha Mamine. Once more and we're done. Buddha Samine. You can wave a little bit. Buddha Samine. Buddha Samine. Buddha Samine. Last time. Buddha Samine. Buddha Samine. Thank you very much.
We're going to go over there and tape people. We're going to tape it on. You want to take it over there and then tape people, get the picture? Where's John Yevsky? You bring this over.
Well, thank you so much for being our special guest. As a small token of our appreciation to you, we'd like to have you come up here.
Okay.
We have 2 coffee mugs, and in the morning when you're having coffee, we want you to, or tea, we want you to drink your coffee and tea out of
Thank
these,
you. Have to be quiet now. She's talking.
out of these mugs, and think of us.
Thank you.
And we have this little logo pin. You know, we are the Lutefisk capital of the nation. So we want you to put that on every once in a while.
Well, this is Norwegian, you see, so I think I'm a lutefisk general.
So we want you to wear that.
Thank you.
And then we know in days like this, it's hard to think of weather being cold, but it will get cold. And we want to present you with this lovely African.
Wow.
A collector's item with so when you get cold, yeah.
I'm right now.
Thank you, Bob. And now, just to remind you, the books will be. Thank you.
Three of them? Yeah, change that. Showing him a lot of change, yeah. One tender per minute. One, two? That schoolhouse I used to work at. You got them? That would solve a lot of things. So a lot of my books can be in there. Whatever, you know, that would. They'll have to talk to her again. She already knows where it can go. Give me your telephone number. Where are you going?
I'm not sure what the money thing was.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
No, I did mine.
Oh, we'll get one.
Okay.
What am I doing? Write it down here? Give me your telephone number where you're going to be.
Well, we're at the end over here. Put it on here. I don't even know where you're.
What's Ed?
H-E-N.